Every year, millions of people board cruise ships expecting sunshine, calm water, and a break from ordinary life. What they don't expect is to never come home. Behind the buffet lines and the deck parties, cruise ships have been the setting for some of the most disturbing deaths in modern history. Deaths that exposed negligence, violence, and the terrifying reality that in the middle of the ocean, help is very far away. Here are 5 of the most horrifying cruise deaths ever recorded. It was the evening of January 13, 2012, off the coast of Giglio Island, Italy. The Costa Concordia had left the port of Civitavecchia earlier that night with 3,006 passengers and 1,023 crew members on board, bound for a 7-day cruise through the Mediterranean. It would never complete that journey. As the ship approached Giglio Island, Captain Francesco Schettino ordered a deviation from the programmed route. He wanted to perform a maritime salute. A sail passed close to the island shore. The area was known for rock formations beneath the surface, and at some point one of them appeared in the ship's path. Schettino ordered a course correction. The Indonesian helmsman, due to a language barrier on the bridge, steered the vessel in the opposite direction. It took 13 seconds to correct the mistake. Those 13 seconds were enough. The stern of the Concordia struck the reef at around 9:45 that evening, opening a 174-foot tier along the port side of the hull. 5 compartments began flooding almost immediately, including the engine room. The ship lost power and without its engines or rudder began drifting on the current. In the dining hall, passengers had heard a sudden loud bang. A crew member announced over the intercom that the ship had experienced an electrical failure. Staff continued moving through the vessel, telling people to return to their cabins. Everything was under control, they said. It wasn't. Schettino's communication with the cruise line's crisis coordinator on shore was fragmented and delayed. When he finally reported that 3 sections of the ship were flooded, 6 minutes passed before he declared a general emergency. Another 27 minutes passed after that before he ordered the ship abandoned. By then, the Concordia was listing so badly that launching lifeboats from one side had become nearly impossible. The evacuation collapsed into chaos. Passengers scrambled across tilting decks in darkness. Some jumped into the cold Mediterranean and swam toward the island. Others remained trapped on board for hours, eventually lifted off by helicopter. A Coast Guard captain reached Schettino by radio and ordered him repeatedly to return to the vessel. Schettino refused. He later claimed he had fallen into a lifeboat by accident. Roughly 300 passengers were still on board when he left. By early morning on January 14, 2012, the Concordia had come to rest on its side against an underwater ledge near the Giglio shoreline. Of the more than 4,200 people who had been on board, 32 were gone. 27 passengers and 5 crew members. Among the dead was a 5-year-old child. The last body was not recovered until November 2014, more than 2 years after the ship came down. The legal aftermath stretched for years. In July 2013, 5 crew members and the company's crisis coordinator pleaded guilty to various charges and received sentences of less than 3 years. None of them went to prison. Schettino was tried separately. In February 2015, he was convicted of manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, and abandoning ship. He was sentenced to 16 years. His appeal was rejected in May 2017, and he began serving his sentence at Rebibbia prison in Rome. The salvage of the wreck became the largest maritime salvage operation in history. In September 2013, the 114,000-ton hull was finally righted, after a 19-hour operation involving hundreds of workers and specially built underwater platforms. The ship was towed to Genoa in July 2014 and eventually scrapped. The total cost of the disaster, including victims' compensation, the salvage, and the scrapping, came to an estimated $2 billion. That figure was more than 3 times the original cost of building the ship. What the Concordia case made clear was how quickly the distance between a routine evening and a catastrophe can close. A course deviation ordered on a whim. A miscommunication lasting 13 seconds. A captain who left the ship while hundreds of people were still on it. Each decision compounded the last, and 32 people paid for all of them. On September 23, 2002, the P&O Pacific Sky departed Sydney, Australia. Diane Brimble was on board. She was 42 years old, a mother of 3, and she had spent 2 years putting money aside to make this trip happen. In the end, she could only afford to bring one of her children, her youngest daughter, Tahlia. The two of them boarded together alongside Diane's sister, Alma Wood, and Alma's daughter, Carrie Ann. All 4 shared a cabin on the Dolphin deck. The plan was a 10-day cruise around the South Pacific. That first evening unfolded the way a holiday is supposed to. A sail-away cocktail party on deck, drinks watching the sun go down, dinner together, and quiet talk about what the coming days might hold. Afterward, Alma, Carrie Ann, and Talia went back to the cabin. Diane walked with them, kissed Talia goodnight, and then headed to the ship's nightclub alone. She never came back. The next morning, Alma woke to an empty bunk and went looking. She had Diane paged over the ship's intercom. The response that came back wasn't a return page. A staff member asked Alma to come to the medical center. When she arrived, she was told her sister was gone. Diane's naked body had been found on the floor of a cabin belonging to 4 men she had apparently met the night before. The Pacific Sky did not stop. It continued on to Noumea as scheduled. Diane's daughter, sister, and niece had no choice but to remain on the ship for 2 more days before they could disembark and fly home. Back in Sydney, family members were given almost no information, only that she had died. Detectives boarded the ship in Noumea and stayed with the crews to gather evidence and question witnesses. What began coming into focus was deeply troubling. 8 men from Adelaide were traveling together on the same tour. Security staff and witnesses placed Diane in the company of several of them at the disco. When it closed at 4:20 in the morning, she was seen leaving at the same time as some of those men. 4 hours later, at 8:30 that same morning, one of the group, Mark Wilhelm, called from cabin D182 asking for medical help. Diane was on the floor, unresponsive. The ship's medical team could not revive her. She was pronounced dead at 9:03. Toxicology results, which took some time to come back, revealed a large amount of GHB in her system. The drug, sometimes sold under the street name Liquid Fantasy, is well known as a date rape drug. It can render a person unconscious and, at sufficient doses, stop breathing. The coroner's inquest into Diane's death did not open until March 2006 in Sydney, more than 3 years after she was buried. The delay itself became part of the family's grief. When the inquest finally ran its course, the coroner confirmed that Diane had died from the effects of the drug and that something had happened to her over which she had no control. Wilhelm admitted to being the last person with her before she lost consciousness. He offered no explanation for what had taken place. No one was ever charged, and no one was ever convicted of anything connected to her death. The case became a flashpoint in Australia, pushing questions about how cruise ships handle deaths at sea and whether companies moved too quickly to protect operations rather than passengers. Diane's family kept pushing for answers long after the inquest closed. The questions never found satisfying answers. What made the Brimble case particularly significant in Australian legal history was what it revealed about the structural gap between what a passenger expects of a cruise ship and what the ship is actually obligated to provide. When Diane died, the Pacific Sky was a sealed environment, controlled entirely by P&O. The company decided when the ship moved, who could board it, what evidence was preserved, and when the next port of call would arrive. Diane's family had no leverage at any point in that process. She had saved for 2 years. The trip cost her everything. On June 29, 2005, George Allen Smith IV and his new wife, Jennifer Hagel Smith, boarded Royal Caribbean's Brilliance of the Seas in Barcelona. They were 26 days into a marriage, setting off on a 12-day honeymoon cruise through the Mediterranean. Smith was 26 years old, a computer search engine analyst from Greenwich, Connecticut. The two had wed in Newport, Rhode Island, and by any measure the trip ahead looked like everything a honeymoon should be. By the evening of July 4, 2005, the couple was drinking heavily and moving between the ship's casino and the disco, alongside friends they had made on board. Around 3:30 in the morning, they had an argument. Jennifer left the disco alone. Cruise ship staff found her passed out in a hallway and helped her back to the cabin around 4:30. She later told investigators she had no memory of that night. The cabin was empty when staff brought her in. But earlier, neighbors had heard things that drew their attention. Smith and 3 other men had been in the cabin together. The noise from inside was loud enough that security was called, raised voices, the sound of furniture being dragged or shoved. Just before 4:20 in the morning, a neighbor watched 3 men walk out of the cabin and disappear down the corridor. When authorities questioned those men, they said Smith had been drunk and they had helped him into bed. They left him there, they said, alive. At around 8:30 that morning, a passenger walking on deck noticed something below the balcony of the Smiths' cabin. Blood on the canopy of a lifeboat. The pattern of it was not a smear or a drip. It was shaped like handprints and footprints. Investigators also found blood inside the cabin itself. That was the moment ship authorities understood George Smith was gone. The brilliance of the seas was docking at Kusadasi, a resort town on the Aegean coast of Turkey, when the discovery was made. Turkish police came aboard and started an investigation while the ship sat in port. Smith's family later said Royal Caribbean had failed to lock down the scene quickly, and that evidence may have been lost or the cabin disturbed before any proper forensic work could be done. The FBI took over from there. The 3 men who had been in the cabin with Smith were questioned at length, more than once. One of them was later recorded on video making a comment about Smith's death that investigators and the family found deeply troubling. According to reporting on the case, the man described what had happened as giving Smith a paragliding lesson without a parachute. The FBI treated that recording seriously, but after years of work, the Bureau concluded there was not enough evidence to prove criminal intent. In 2015, a full decade after Smith was last seen, the investigation was officially closed. It moved through Congress and eventually helped push the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act into law in 2010. That legislation set out security requirements for cruise ships leaving or arriving at United States ports and mandated that suspected criminal activity be reported directly to the FBI. It was one of the few concrete things to come out of what happened on that balcony. George Smith was 26 years old. He was on his honeymoon. The Mediterranean closed over him, and no one has been held accountable for what the blood on that lifeboat canopy suggested. His family has never stopped believing it was not an accident. On November 6, 2025, Anna Keaptainner boarded the Carnival Horizon with her family. She was 18 years old, a senior at Temple Christian School in Titusville, Florida. Her birth mother, Heather Wright, described her as a girl who never got into trouble, who loved the water, and who wanted to make the people around her laugh. Those who knew her at school called her a beautiful soul. She was set to graduate in a matter of months. She did not come home from that cruise. The Carnival Horizon was in international waters, heading back toward Miami when Anna was killed. The Miami-Dade Medical Examiner's Office later determined the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled. Her body was not found right away. On November 7th and 8th, 2025, a housekeeper discovered it concealed under a bed in the cabin, identified in court documents only by the initials T.H. He was also from Titusville. According to federal court records, T.H. had sexually assaulted Anna before intentionally killing her. The attack happened while the ship was still at sea, which placed the case under federal maritime jurisdiction. For weeks, very little of this was public. T.H. was charged as a juvenile in February 2026, and the case was sealed because of his age. He appeared in federal court in Miami and pleaded not guilty. A federal magistrate judge allowed him to remain free pending trial, but the conditions were strict. He had to live with an uncle in Hernando County. He could not be alone with anyone under 18 without adult supervision. What broke the silence was not the criminal case itself. It was a court filing in a separate proceeding, a custody dispute involving T.H.'s mother, which mentioned in passing that the FBI was investigating and that a minor child might be connected to a death. That filing surfaced in mid-November 2025. The Associated Press had confirmed T.H.'s identity as the suspect from documents filed in that custody dispute. From that point forward, the story moved fast. The details that came out through the unsealed records were difficult to sit with. Anna had been on a family vacation. She was sleeping in the same cabin as the person who killed her. The housekeeper who found found her body had to pull back a bedsheet hanging to the floor to discover her. Whatever happened in that cabin, it was hidden, as if it might stay that way. On April 13, 2026, the U.S. Department of Justice announced that TH had been indicted as an adult. U.S. District Judge Beth Bloom had ordered the case transferred out of the juvenile system. The charges were murder and aggravated sexual abuse. If convicted on both counts, TH faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. Heather Wright found out about the indictment by phone. She told reporters she was relieved her daughter got justice and that she was glad the case was being prosecuted at the adult level because she had worried it wouldn't be. When asked about the sexual abuse charge, she said she didn't even want to think about it. She said she couldn't begin to imagine what Anna had gone through. Anna Keaptainner had spent her whole life near the water. Her mother said they were constantly going to the lake near their home so Anna could swim. She loved it. She boarded that ship expecting the same thing millions of passengers expect. A few days away from ordinary life, surrounded by open water and blue sky. The water she loved was the last thing around her when she died. It was March 20th, 2011. Rebecca Coriam was 24 years old and working as a youth activities coordinator aboard Disney Wonder, a Disney cruise line ship sailing the Pacific Ocean between Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and Los Angeles. She was from Chester, England, and had been living the kind of adventure that the job promised, traveling the world, working with children, making a life far from home. That morning, a security camera in a crew area of the ship recorded footage of Rebecca standing alone on a phone. She looked distressed. Witnesses said she had been upset over a personal matter the previous day. Other crew members passed through the area during the recording. After the footage ended, Rebecca Coriam was not seen again. Her family was not notified until the ship reached port in Los Angeles. When her parents flew to California to begin searching for answers, they found a system they were wholly unprepared for. The Disney Wonder was registered in the Bahamas. That made it a Bahamian ship, and it made the Bahamian police the lead investigators. Bahamian authorities had not been present when the ship docked. Evidence on board, including whatever the security camera system had recorded, her parents said later that it was never clear to them who was responsible for the investigation or whether anyone was asking the questions that needed to be asked. No body was ever found. No cause of death was ever established. What happened to Rebecca Coriam between the moment the camera last saw her and the moment the ship docked in Los Angeles remains officially unknown. Her parents have said they believe foul play was involved. They founded a campaign, Justice for Rebecca, to push for changes to how deaths and disappearances on cruise ships are investigated, including requirements that ships preserve evidence immediately and report incidents to law enforcement in the home country of the victim. When her parents, Anne and Mike Coriam, first arrived in Los Angeles after the ship docked, they were not given access to the security footage. They were told different versions of what had happened and when. Key details about the condition of the area where she was last seen were not shared with them in a timely way. The Disney Cruise Line cooperated with Bahamian investigators, but the Coriams felt that cooperation did not extend to the family itself. Years later, in interviews with UK media, Anne Coriam said she still didn't know what had happened to her daughter and had lost faith that any authority would ever tell her. The broader problem her case exposed was structural. Cruise ships registered under so-called flags of convenience. The Bahamas, Panama, Liberia, and other nations that offer favorable registration terms operate under the maritime law of those registering countries. When a crime or suspicious death occurs on board, the host country at port and the flag state of the ship both have jurisdiction. In practice, that jurisdictional complexity has repeatedly resulted in investigations that moved slowly, preserved evidence poorly, and left families without answers. The Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act, signed into law in 2010 after the George Smith case, addressed some of this. It wasn't enough to help the Coriams. The UK Foreign Office assisted the family but had no authority to compel the investigation to go differently. Her case was officially opened and closed without a verdict. Rebecca Coriam was declared legally dead. The Justice for Rebecca campaign did eventually contribute to changes in how cruise ship deaths are handled. In 2017, the UK government issued updated guidance for British nationals who experience a death or disappearance on a cruise ship, acknowledging that the jurisdictional complexity of maritime law had consistently disadvantaged families trying to get answers. The changes were modest relative to the problem. Cruise ships continued to operate under the laws of their flag states, and the gap between what a family deserves to know and what any authority is actually obligated to tell them remained wide. Her parents kept speaking publicly about Rebecca for years after her death, not because it was easy, but because they believed that if they stopped, the system would simply continue as before. Nobody goes on a cruise expecting that something could happen to a family member, and the answer could simply never come. Rebecca Coriam's case proved that it could. The ship kept its schedule. The sea gave nothing back. She was 24 years old. The footage exists. The answers don't.